me shut the lights off behind me.
No, the light's fine, I think.
You think so?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Okay, this is World 1, SOL 15. You're going to apply your social science skills to understand the developments leading to the Renaissance in Europe and its impact on Western civilization by determining the economic and cultural foundations of the Renaissance, sequencing events related to the first Italian city-states and their political development, including Machiavelli's theory of governing as described in The Prince, Machiavelli.
Good guy.
Yeah. All right. So citing the contributions of artists and philosophers of the Renaissance, including Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Petrarch, and comparing and contrasting the Italian and Northern Renaissance and citing the contributions of writers.
I feel like I got a guardian angel over my shoulder.
Yeah,
Are you sure I shouldn't shut those lights off?
All right. Here, let's go and see. Let's see.
Oh, so
Is that
much
better?
better. That's so much better.
All right. All right. Let me. Oh yeah, I guess that is a little better.
Okay, this is SOL, number 15 for World History 1. This deals with the Renaissance. What does Renaissance mean, Mike?
Rebirth.
The rebirth.
But the rebirth of what?
That would be the rebirth of Greco-Roman culture in World History 1. Now that you know that is Greco, meaning Greek, Roman, meaning Roman. So it's the rebirth of the Roman and Greek learning, art, philosophy, etc. A lot of this was actually associated with the Crusades, because what happened with the Crusades was that, remember, the Crusades started in 1095 when Pope Innocent II had the Council of Clermont, and he starts the Crusade, which is a holy war for the Holy Land. The Christians wanted to come back and take back the Holy Land. When this happens, you have your Crusades. Now, the Crusades are, in the Christian perspective, not successful. So the only crusade that actually met its goal was the First Crusade, where they took the city of Jerusalem. But what happens is you start getting cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion happens between the Middle East and these Europeans who are traveling to Egypt, these Europeans who are traveling to the Holy Land. And when they get there, they're experiencing different textiles. They're experiencing different foods. They're experiencing all these things. And then when they come back to Europe, guess what they want? They want these different items, okay? And they don't have them in Europe, so they have to do trade with the Middle East. With this trade, you're going to get cultural diffusion. You also get the concept of credit. What is credit?
Money that you have to pay back.
Money that you have to pay back with
interest.
All will have fun. So banking starts happening. Let's go to the next one, see what happens. All right, here we go. What happens is this. Banking becomes very important because most people don't have enough money. If you're a fisherman and you're making your money off of fishing, it's a hand-to-mouth survival, right, Mike?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is these fishermen start realizing that they can make more money if they don't use their boats for fishing, but use their boats for trade. They have places like Venice. Venice traditionally was a fishing city. And then these people in Venice all had ships because Venice is a bunch of islands. It's archipelago.
An archipelago.
So what happens is you have these people that were fishermen and they realize they can make more money if they use their boats for actually bringing trade goods back and forth from the Middle East and Europe. And what happens is these people are smart. They realize, the more boats I have, the more money I will make. But the problem is they don't have the income to buy these new boats. So they start going and they borrow money. But the thing is during the Middle Ages, the church controlled all aspects of the economy. The church controlled all aspects of daily life. But the church made a ruling on usury. Usury is borrowing money on credit.
Christians aren't allowed to do that.
No.
Or they can't lend money.
They can lend money, but they can't lend money for interest.
For interest. So that means that one particular ethnic group in Europe are going to become the lenders.
That'd be the Jews.
The Jews.
But you also get the Italian city of Florence, the Medicis. You've heard of Medici, the Medici family. they become powerful and rich through the practice of usury, the practice of banking. And in the Renaissance, this rebirth, banking becomes a huge new, I hate to use the word industry, but a way to make a living. And the church can't get its hands on it because the church wants to make money off it, but the church said that usury is a sin. So can the church become a bank?
No.
So what happens is that you have these non-Christians, these secular group coming in, especially in northern Italy. And the secular group starts lending money. They start lending credit, and people start buying boats. And the more boats you buy, the more money you have. So if you're a fisherman, if young Mr. Pierce is a fisherman, and he has one boat, and then he borrows money, and now he has five boats, what just happened to the amount of money he's getting from his business?
You're making money.
You're making fivefold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you got that, that amount coming back and forth. You got new accounting practices being made. The Arabic numerals, which we already covered. Actually, they're not Arabic; they come from the Greek Empire in India. But the Europeans didn't get it from the Indians. The Europeans got it from the Muslims, so that's why we call it the Arabic numbering system. You also get the study of the Byzantines, the collapse of the Byzantine Empire. When the Byzantine Empire fell in 1453, the Ottoman Turks, that was our last link to the Romans.
Yep. I mean, what did the Byzantines call themselves?
They called themselves the Romans, the East Romans.
Byzantines is just a term that historians apply to them later.
Because of the city of Byzantium, which they built Constantinople. But when that last link to Rome fell, people started wondering. They started wanting to grab hold of this Roman Empire. They wanted to start to learn more about this Roman Empire that they just lost. Okay? So when the collapse of the Roman Empire, or the collapse of the Byzantine Empire, the interest in Greco-Roman culture is expanded because people felt like they lost something when the Byzantine empires fell in 1453 to the Ottoman Turks.
Right. When we get later in European history, we're going to be talking about anti-Semitism in Europe, and like Mr. Anderson said, you had that Medici family that found that market as bankers. But you also find a lot of Jewish people in Europe around this time finding niche as bankers in this market. And so the roots of European anti-Semitism are right here around the time of the Renaissance. That's going to cause some big trouble later on.
All right, the three main cities that we need to know with the Renaissance are Florence, Venice, and Genoa. Now, imagine Italy. Remember, Italy looks like a woman's boot, right? When you talk about these cities, you got the trading city on the eastern half of Italy being the city of Venice. Venice is an archipelago. It's a group of islands that they built this city on. And they actually built the cities there because of all the invasions that were happening from the Huns and from the Goths, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths. All these Gothic nations were invading Italy. So what Venice did is they moved out into these islands so they felt protected. And through these islands, you develop the city of Venice and they become traders. They start off as a fishing village and then they become a trading city and they start trading with the Middle East. Then you have on the opposite side, on the western side of Italy, you have the city of Genoa. Now, we talked about Genoa already because that's where the bubonic plague came in 1347. In 1347, the plague first comes into Europe through Genoa, and that's because Genoa is a trading hub. And right smack in between those two cities, you get the city of Florence. And Florence is a trading city, but it's more of a banking city. It's a city that makes its living by giving other cities money. So they're all along trade routes. They're independent city states. When we think of Italy now, we think of one nation. But back then, it wasn't one nation. Just like Greece is one nation today. But when we studied Greece, it was all these independent city states. Well, Italy was the same way. Italy was just like the Mayans. Italy was just like Mesopotamia. Italy was just like Greece. It was made up of all these small city states. Okay. So most of these city states were governed as a republic. Now, a republic is what kind of democracy? A representative democracy. Okay. So these are representative democracies. As we talked about in the previous slide, in the east, we got Venice, which was the trading hub for the eastern part of the Italian peninsula. In the west, we got Genoa. Genoese, who were a trading hub. And then in the middle, you got Florence. Florence is where you're going to have a lot of your great art coming in. And you can see the city of Rome down at the bottom down there too. The city of Rome is where, the Catholic Church winds up making its center. There's Bologna and there's Milan. You're all over the place, Mr. Pierce. All right, let's go to the next slide. I'm gonna have to stop it because we're not. Okay, we got Machiavelli. Machiavelli is known as a treatise. What's a treatise?
A treatise?
Yes. He's a guy that makes
Treaties?
treaties. Bingo! When you have all these different city-states, they're not all going to get along. They're all trying to claw and scrape and become the most powerful city in Italy. So what you have is you have guys like Machiavelli, and his job was to go out and make treaties between these different city-states. Now, as being a treatise, do you think he worked with a bunch of different types of government?
I know he advised a lot of princes.
He did. He advised princes. So he sees all these different governments, and he decides he's going to write a book on how someone should gain power, how to keep and maintain power. And he's going to call that book what?
The Prince.
The Prince. That's right. So, in The Prince, he decides the best way is that you have to have someone who has absolute power. He supports a person, one individual making all the decisions. And in this, he comes up with this unique concept. The ends justify the means. So that means if I have to steal to gain power, what should I do, Mr. Pierce?
Well, then you do it.
Then you do it.
Because then ultimately, even though he's got to do something bad to maintain power, it's in the best interest of the state for him to maintain power. So even though he's going to do some things that are dishonest to maintain power, what do they say? You got to break a few eggs to make an omelet.
Well, he broke the egg. That was his
Certainly did.
And what happens is this, is the ends justify the means. If you have to lie to gain power, then by all means, lie. If you can do good, then do good. But if you have to do evil, then do evil. The ends will justify the means.
Right.
All that matters is me gaining absolute power. So that's what he advises. And it sounds kind of terrible, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It sounds kind of ugly. But the truth is that we're in an election year. And guess what? We're going to see ads where people are going to say things that aren't always the truth.
That's correct. And if you ask a lot of contemporary leaders their favorite books, The Prince is always going to show up somewhere on that list. So even modern leaders still look at Machiavelli's The Prince as a way to inform their public persona. One really interesting thing that I've always read is that Machiavelli said that leaders should always appear religious. They didn't have to actually follow the Bible or whatever religious teaching. They just have to make it look like they do. You have to appear religious.
Again, the ends will justify the means. And another famous thing he said, he advised that one should only do good. Oh, excuse me, advised that one should only do good if possible, but evil when necessary. So again, we're going right back to the same concept. The ends will justify the means. Machiavelli. Okay, this is a picture of Machiavelli. Machiavelli, again, is the guy that wrote The Prince. And you can look at him. That's the guy that was the treatist. He was the guy that was going around and making treaties between all the different city-states. Machiavelli, the great writer of The Prince.
All right, so European trade is going to lead to the accumulation of wealth and the rise of Italian city-states. And so you're going to start to see a shift, away from, more traditional forms of like feudalism and things like that to a merchant class. And this is going to create a lot of turbulence in Europe in the centuries to come. So Machiavelli, who we talked about, remember he wrote The Prince, observed that city-state rulers of his day produced guidelines for the acquisition and maintenance of power by absolute rule. That's going to change gradually as we approach 1500. You're going to have some monarchs like, Louis XIV that are going to try to reassert absolute rule. But Mr. Anderson mentioned republics. You're going to start to see a lot more of that kind of thinking pop up and challenge this idea of absolute rule. Machiavelli was trying to advise leaders on how to hold on to that power.
All right. Now, when we talk about not just art, but we talk about life in the medieval time period, everything was focused on the church and salvation. You remember, when your life is terrible, when things are going bad, you want to grab hold of something that gives you hope. You want to grab hold of something that's going to lift you up. And the church was the focus of the people in the medieval world. The church was everything, salvation. When things are bad here, at least you have a bright future. Then a renaissance comes in, and that focus starts to change. Things are getting better. So you start focusing on the individual, on the person. Worldly matters, things going on around you, and Christianity. So you also, Christianity is part of the Renaissance art, but it also has a focus on the individual and the worldly matters around.
I think we had mentioned in one of our previous lectures that, like, if you looked at medieval art, would you know who the artist was?
Nope.
No, they never really claimed to it. It was always, everything was just in the next life. But like Mr. Anderson said, now we're focusing more on this life and worldly matters and the individual. And so, in addition to the art itself being more human, the people that made it are going to sign their names to it.
In the Italian Renaissance, it's the rebirth. Renaissance means the rebirth. So this is going to be the rebirth of the literature and artistic skills of the Romans and the Greeks. Some of these people that do this are Leonardo DiCaprio, the guy that was in Titanic. Did you know he was in Titanic?
Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh, it's Da Vinci, the other Leonardo.
The other Leonardo.
Leonardo da Vinci is a painter. So when you think of Leonardo, think of the painting, like the Mona Lisa, who's got that little sly smile going on, and the Last Supper. Leonardo was the ultimate Renaissance man.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got Michelangelo, who painted some. He painted the ceiling of the 16th, not the 16th, the 15th, named after a person, the 15th chapel. And he made the statue of the David. So he was a sculptor. He wasn't just a painter, he was also a sculptor.
He also lived in the sewers and practiced martial arts.
I don't know what you're talking about, but maybe in another life.
Okay.
That's the ceiling of the 15th chapel right there. Now, I've never been to Italy and I've never been able to walk in and experience this myself. But that ceiling is the ceiling that Michelangelo painted. I can imagine it's absolutely beautiful. And if you walk to the center of this chapel, if you walk to the center, you're going to see that's the one next to it, but that's all right. If you click it, we'll go to the next slide and we'll show it. And look straight up, you'll see that. That is the creation of man. That is God creating Adam. You click it here. And that's what it looks like. God creating Adam. And notice, if you look at this, who's doing all the work? Is man doing the work, or is God putting forth the effort? Man sitting there leisurely, doing nothing. God is putting the effort out. God is doing that. That is a Renaissance idea, that man is here and God is working for us. Now, that's the David. The David is absolutely shredded. He's built just like Mr. Pierce, just all muscle, okay? And you can see the artwork that goes into the hair and the muscles. And again, this is the rebirth of Greco-Roman. Now, the Greeks and Romans celebrated the human body. So you're going to have the nudes showing off their muscles and, you know, what the human body should look like. Another famous sculpture of his is the Moses. If you look at the Moses, you can see the beard and the robes that he's in. Can you imagine this? This was done over 600 years ago. Look at the quality that is in that. Look at the effort that is put into that. It's incredible. And there's a picture of Michelangelo. Michelangelo lived to the ripe old age of 89. And you can see he has a broken nose. Do you know how he got that broken nose?
I don't.
When he was young, he was in art class with another student, and they were painting the same picture. They were copying a picture, and he looked over at this guy's painting and said, that's not very good. And the guy blasted him in the face
right in the
and
nose.
punched him right in the old kazoo and broke it. And from that point on, Michelangelo had that giant hooked nose because he got dope popped because of his arrogance. Now, contrary, opposite of him, you're going to have, oh, wait, the next one's the Pieta. The Pieta is by far my favorite thing that Michelangelo painted. That is the Mother Mary holding Jesus off the cross. And you can see the hole in Jesus' hands. You can see the veins in his arms. You can see where Mary's holding him up by the armpit, how the flesh is pushed up. And you can look at her head. Look at the headdress she's wearing. Can you imagine doing that with a chisel and hammer? It's unbelievable. And he did this as a 20 something, a 19-year-old. And when he did it, people were like, no way that punk kid did that. No way. And he got so upset that he came in and he took a chisel and he chisels his name across the front of the statue, Michelangelo. So other people wouldn't try to take credit for his work. Now, just like most things that are nice, there's always going to be some jerk trying to ruin things for everyone else. Back in the 1960s, you were able to get right next to the Pieta, and then some idiot in 1972 came in and took a sledgehammer to it. That's the idiot. And he takes a sledgehammer and he starts sledgehammering the Pieta. And after he was done, you can hit the next slide, you can see the Pieta is all broken up. He broke her. He broke this beautiful piece of art. And it took these skilled craftsmen years to try to fix this work. And today you can go and see the Pieta, and it looks almost perfect. But the problem is now you have to stand 15 feet away from it behind a piece of bulletproof glass. And you can't get close enough to see the master's work on this because some idiot decided that he was going to be cool and hit it with a sledgehammer. Are you feeling artistic today, Mike? Now, that's the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa, you can see she's got that little smile. Now, the thing about the Mona Lisa smile is this, is the Mona Lisa, to me, it's not that great of a painting. But when you're showing a smile, you're showing emotion. And pictures didn't have emotion during the Middle Ages. Everyone had a straight mouth. It was just nothing showed emotion. Then he started painting this Mona Lisa, and it shows emotion. She's got a smile. And the Mona Lisa has been stolen so many times that people used to cut it out of the frame. And every time they cut it, what happened to the size of the painting?
Got a little smaller.
And that's the Mona Lisa today. It's not nearly the size it once was because every time someone stole it, they cut it out of the frame, making it actually smaller. And if you go to the next slide, that's the Last Supper. Now, Leonardo is the ultimate Renaissance guy. And when he painted this is a fresco. A fresco you paint on wall, all right? So he has this giant wall that he painted this Last Supper. And being a Renaissance man, you want to try new things, right? So what he does is he came up with this new paint, and he painted this in this new paint. And after a year and a half, guess what the paint started to do?
It started coming off.
It started chipping off. So since that time, about every 2 years, guess what they have to do? They have to come in and repaint the Last Supper. So my phone went off in the middle of that. How about that? Anyways, let's go to the next painting, or the next painting, yeah. And there is Leonardo, the Renaissance man. He invented a tank before there were tanks. He invented a machine gun before there was machine guns. He invented shoes that could walk on water, Mr. Pierce. They didn't work, but it was an idea. It was an idea that he had. You know, he wrote everything backwards.
He wrote everything backwards.
Yeah, and people used to think that he did it because he didn't want people stealing his idea, but he was actually left-handed. And as a right-handed writer, you're pulling a pen. You're keeping your hands out of the ink. But if you're left-handed and you're pushing the pen, your hands constantly getting in the what? Getting in your ink.
Getting in the ink.
So he was smart enough that he could just write everything backwards and not get his hands put in the ink. I couldn't do that. Could you?
No.
Don't be modest. All right. Humanism. Humanism is the celebration of the individual. Now, what happens with this concept of humanism? Humanism is that the focus during the Middle Ages, everything was on the church. Everything was on the church. The focus wasn't on the individual.
They had the what is it, the great chain of being, where basically, everything was in a big hierarchy, and regular people were down the lowest level of that hierarchy. Well, they were above like rocks and plants, but then you had like the princes and nobles and the king and the god, you know.
So you had this hierarchy where there's no emphasis on the individual. But through the study of the Greeks and Romans, this humanistic concept starts coming back up. Because remember, the Greeks didn't believe. Well, let me step back a bit. The Romans eventually become Christian. But before the Romans were Christians, they were pagans. And for the pagans, the reality was the here and now. Celebrate, live the here and now, because you don't know what's going to come next. So celebrate the here and now. Bread, wine, and games. Celebration of the individual. What do you want? And this concept kind of steps back in during the Renaissance, this humanistic concept. And, a lot of the artists were humanists. So they were supported by these wealthy patrons. A patron is a person who pays someone to do something. So if Mr. Pierce, you saw his artistic skill, he's got ability. So if you guys were like, hey, I want Mr. Pierce painting a picture of me, then I'm going to pay Mr. Pierce money. And then through that money, what's going to happen is you're going to become his patron. Now, the father of humanism, why don't you underline that? The father of humanism is Petrarch. Now, how is Petrarch the father of humanism? Petrarch wrote sonnets. Sonnets are a type of poems. And what happened is Petrarch was kind of a stalker. He was a bit of a stalker, if you will, because he was really in love with this girl named Laura. And the best way to meet a girl that you're in love with is never talk to her. And that's what he did with Laura. He would not talk to her. He would look from afar and he would see Laura and he'd like, woo, Laura, and he would swoon. He would swoon, I say. And then he started writing these sonnets to her. Oh, Laura, you're so pretty. Even though during this time period, your hygiene's probably terrible and you probably have no teeth, but you're so, so pretty. So he started writing these love poems. And of course, Laura doesn't know that he loves her. And she goes out and she marries someone, she marries someone else. And then she dies. A lot of historians speculate that she died during childbirth. We really don't know.
The chances are pretty high if you're a woman. I think it's like, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, you're going to die during childbirth.
During this time.
It's not great. Yeah.
Yeah. The average woman lived to be about 25.
Yeah.
So that, when that happened, Petrarch got so depressed, but he takes these love sonnets that he wrote for Laura and they get released into northern Italy. And then all of a sudden, these people started reading these love sonnets to Laura. And these men were courting women, and the women would hear these, these heartfelt love poems that Petrarch had for Laura. And she would look at her man friend who was courting her and say, hey, where's my love poem? And of course, every dude was like, of course I have a love poem. Don't be silly.
And that's how Hallmark was invented.
Pretty much. And then that guy ran home and he wrote himself a pretty terrible poem. Now, when I was courting my wife, I wrote her a poem. Do you want to hear that poem, Michael?
Not particularly.
I wouldn't give it to you. It's terrible. I am the Dr. Seuss of poetry. If it doesn't rhyme, I just think you're lazy. Okay? So all my poems rhyme. They're not very, a love poem that rhymes usually doesn't end well. But I gave it a shot. I gave it to my wife. She still has it somewhere.
I think
Did you write your wife a poem?
I think I've heard your poem. It's Roses Are Red.
No,
Violets
no.
Are Blue.
It was a Lee Anderson original. Thank you very much.
Wendy, I love you. That's how it goes, right?
No. It was way better than that.
Oh,
way better. But it was more Dr. Seuss, like it rhymes.
Yeah.
Did you write your wife a poem?
I've not written my wife a poem.
You're a terrible human being.
Yeah, I
cannot believe you did not write your wife a poem. I'm gonna talk to her, and before this day's over, young Michael Pierce will be jogging. He'll be looking up Petrarch.
No, I don't.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. So Petrarch. But what happens is this: love. Love is how. Whoa! I choked him out instead. Love is how one individual feels about another. It's humanism. How do I feel about my wife? How did Petrarch feel about Laura? That has nothing to do with the church. It has nothing to do with the spiritual realm. It's one person's feeling towards another person. The concept of humanism comes out. Love, one person to another person, is an individual experience. And this is how he's considered the father of humanism through his sonnets to Laura, the woman that he was talking. And here's that rascal Petrarch. That's Petrarch, and that's his book of poetry.
So did he wear all this as sort of like camouflage so he could hide in the bushes and spy on Laura? Is that why he's wearing this?
No one knows.
It's like his special spying suit for watching Laura and swooning from afar. He can blend in with the bushes.
Maybe that's where the concept of camouflage came from.
Maybe.
Petrarch, he's not just the father of humanism, he's the father of camouflage.
Who's talking?
The Stalker. But that's his book of poems that he wrote for Laura right there in his hands. And there he is with the laurel leaf wreaths on his head. Okay, again, we were talking about the Italian Renaissance. Now, the Italian Renaissance, you're talking about Venice and Genoa, and basically that's well as don't mention it, but Milan. All of these areas are getting the trade goods coming in from the Middle East, coming in from Africa, coming in from Egypt. You got all these goods coming in. Well, it's not like they're hanging on to the goods there in the cities and people just in the cities buying it. What happens is you have people in Northern Europe coming down, buying the goods in Genoa, buying the goods in Milan, buying the goods in Venice, and then taking those goods back home, back in Northern Europe. And what happens is, again, you get this cultural diffusion happening. If I'm a trader up in, let's say, the Netherlands, and I see, I'm trading from Mr. Pearson. He's got this great big nice house. He's got artwork in it. He's got all this nice stuff. And he's making money, and I'm making money. When I go home back to Northern Europe, am I going to want to live in a little tiny hovel? Or am I going to want to take the money that I'm getting through trade and build a house that rivals those houses I see in Italy? And that's what happens is you start getting this cultural diffusion happen. But the difference in the humanism in the Northern Renaissance is that they have a real thick Christian underlying to it. So, like Mr. Pierce in Italy will have his family painted on a fresco on a wall in his house. I'll have a fresco of my family painted on the wall, and I'll have angels in the background. I'll have some kind of religious theme going on while this is happening. So what happens is in the Northern Renaissance, they take the ideas of humanism, they take the ideas of Christianity, and they morph them into one. They drive it into one, making the Northern Renaissance. Now, in history, there's a lot of things you can put your fingers on and say, this changed history forever. And to me, one of the greatest things that ever happened in history is Johannes Gutenberg. Gutenberg. You think that's Irish? No. Gutenberg's German. A good German stock. Johannes Gutenberg. He comes in and he invents the movable type printing press. Now, what happens before this is that people didn't have books. Books were expensive because they're handwritten.
If all the churches have a copy of the Bible, that's all they need, right?
Evidently. During the Middle Ages, that was it. And most of the priests during the Middle Ages couldn't really read.
Right.
So what happens is this. Gutenberg comes in, and before Gutenberg, as I was saying, they wrote. Everything was written down by scribes. Now, I'm reading a book right now by Dumas Malone, The History of Thomas Jefferson. It's got like thousands of pages. If you were handwriting that, Mr. Pierce, would you sell that for a little bit of money or a lot of money?
No, I'd get my money's worth.
That's right, because it's going to take a year or two to write that all down. So it's going to cost a whole bunch of money to buy a book because of all the work that's put into it. So all of a sudden, these books are, only rich people could afford books, and most rich people couldn't even read the books when they got them. Gutenberg comes in and invents the printing press. Now they're making books quickly. A book that took a year to write takes maybe 2 hours to do with a printing press.
Gutenberg may not have realized it, but he is about to cause a whole lot of upheaval in religious circles because, think about it like this. If only a few people could read the Bible, then those few people can basically say, well, the Bible says that you have to listen to me and do what I say. The Bible says that these are the rules you have to live by. And can people challenge that? No, because they can't read. And even if they could read, they couldn't afford their own copy. Now, all of a sudden, people are going to be able to buy books. Literacy is going to spread. And guess what? People reading and learning things is dangerous when you're in the know, right? So we're going to see all sorts of upheaval in the years to come because of this movable type.
Well, what happens? Well, exactly. What happens is people get these books. Books go from super expensive to now they're affordable. And the average person wants to have a book because that's a sign of wealth.
Yep.
Now, it'd be just like I don't play video games. But if I came in and I said, hey, Mr. Pierce, here's a Nintendo 46. It's like the coolest thing ever, and it's super cheap. Is Mr. Pierce going to buy this Nintendo 46 and be like, oh, man, I got a Nintendo 46. It's awesome. And just put it off in the corner and show people as they come in, look, in that box is a Nintendo 46. Or is he going to break it out and start trying to play it? And just like video games, like I'm terrible at video games because I don't like them. But if I play video games, I'm not going to be very good. But as anything, the more you do it, the better you get. People get books. They don't know how to read. But you're not going to spend all that money on a book and just let it sit on your shelf. You're going to spend that money on a book. You're going to want to know what that book says. And what people start doing is they start trying to read. And at first, they're not very good. But as you plow through, as you keep working, you're going to get better and better and better. And just like Nintendo 46, you're not just want to sit there and play it by yourself. You're going to want your children doing it, right? And before you know it, parents are learning how to read, and they're going to teach their kids how to what? Read. And we're going to have a generation of readers. And from that point on, it's not just going to start the Renaissance. It's also going to start the scientific revolution that happens. Why? Because people are smarter, because they can.
And they're going to have opinions. Different people reading the same book are going to have different opinions about, and I'm especially talking about religious texts.
And we're also going to have people in government.
Yep. Oh yeah, the king is not going to be king for long. Pretty soon, the law is going to be king. More on that later.
And there's the printing press right there. You can see that that's the bar that they'd take, and they'd press that down onto that script where they would have paper on it, and they would dab ink on that, and then when that thing would come up, you'd have a full page of printed paper. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that is actually from the first Gutenberg Bible. Now, if I could read Old German, I could still read that to this day, but I can't. But if I could read Old German, I could still read that. It's still legible. And notice, what's that printed on, Mr. Pierce?
Paper.
Paper.
Where did paper come from?
It comes from Asia. So you got the Asian influence as well, because with the advent of paper, now you have something that the printing press is going to work well with. It's going to work much better with paper than it will with other materials that were used at the time. Let's finish off with some of the northern writers. You got the writers such as Erasmus. Erasmus was a priest, and he was writing in 1511 about the underworkings of the Catholic Church. And just by the name of the book, The Praise of Follies, does that sound like he's saying good things about the church? No, he's talking about how the church mishandles money, how the church is mishandling the souls of the people. Erasmus is before Martin Luther. Now, we're not going to cover Martin Luther in this section. But when you guys take world history too, you are going to delve into the Renaissance, the Reformation. And the very beginnings of the Reformation can be traced back to Erasmus, this priest in the Northern Renaissance that wrote The Praise of Follies, a book about how the working of the church is not, it's not meeting up to the high standards that it should.
Like the sale of indulgences.
Which is going to be huge with the Reformation. Now, you also get Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More was actually friends with Henry VIII. And Sir Thomas More was the guy that wrote the Utopia. Utopia is a perfect society. When I was first started teaching here in Middlesex, my wife was really big into these books, like they were called the Pretties, the Uglies, and I think it's like the Dummies or something. I forget. But she was really into it, but they were dystopias. When I first started teaching, there was a book called The
Giver?
The Giver, yeah. And all the kids had to read The Giver. And that's a dystopia. A dystopia is a utopia that goes wrong. A utopia is a perfect society. Well, the concept of this perfect society comes from Sir Thomas More, and he wrote it in 1516, the story of the utopian society. And what happens to Sir Thomas More is eventually you're going to learn about the Reformation in world history too. And you're going to learn about Henry VIII. Henry VIII switches from the Catholic Church and he starts the Church of England. And Thomas More, his friend, actually revolts against Henry because Thomas More clings to his Catholic religion, and Thomas More is put to death for his faith. Okay. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the Northern Renaissance artists. They portray religious and secular subjects together. So when you look at the art from Northern Renaissance, you're going to see religious and humanistic styles. This painting right here is from the Northern Renaissance. I always thought that guy looked like Tom Petty.
There you go.
There's Tom Petty, and there's that guy. Do you see them? Do you see the similarities?
They are almost exactly the same.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
His hat has a little bit more of circumference. You know, it's a little wider, but like if he was going for a cartoonish impression of Tom Petty, here, hang on. I'm going to put a guitar in his hands. Okay. All right. There we go. And yep, that's that. Wait, there's some more strings. That's Tom Petty.
No, the reason I put this painting in here, it's not because this painting is really good, because it's not. But the thing about it is this, is that they were trying new things in the Renaissance. And this Northern Renaissance painting is giving you perspective. You got the back wall, that's perspective. You got the the forefront. You got the window.
Look at this cute dog.
You got the dog.
Look at these sweet shoes.
They're in or the Netherlands.
Those are basically Crocs or sandals.
True, I can't argue that. And then up top, you have the chandelier hanging down. And if this was a better picture of this picture, you'd see on the back wall there's a mirror, and in the mirror is a painting of the painter painting the picture.
Nice.
It's all about perspective.
All about perspective.
Go ahead, Mr. Pierce.
So, with trade, travel, and literacy, the Italian Renaissance spread to Northern Europe. As people of the North adopted the ideas of Italian Renaissance, they transformed them to suit their circumstances.
And finally, we got this map. And I'll let you do this on your own. But number one is in South America. So that's got to be the Inca. Number two, if I can see it, number two is Rome on the Italian peninsula. Nope. Right over on the Italian peninsula.
Oh, right here.
Nope, that's the.
Oh, God.
Yeah, you messed that up. That's all right. And then number three is in central Mexico. Central Mexico is the Aztecs. Number four, let me find it on this map. I don't see it on here. Number four, I don't see it. Well, I'll end with that because I can't see it from here. So you guys go through and try to fill this map out to the best of your ability.